Good day, I'm Corby Skinner, host of Living Well in Montana. And this is a program of LIFTT, which is, I have to excuse myself because every time we do this program, I think we need to introduce what the program is. We have been doing this show for maybe 4 or 5 weeks, but for a lot of people that are viewing Channel 7 for the first time, may be unfamiliar what LIFTT is. Living independently for today and tomorrow.
That's correct.
So what I want to do before we get started, and I'm going to introduce our host, but first let's tell the audience what LIFTT is.
LIFTT is called a Center for Independent Living, and when we work within the industry, the program, we've referred to us as a CIL, Center for Independent Living, and we are funded by contracts with the state and federal governments. So the services that we provide are free of cost to our consumers, and we are there to find ways to help these individuals overcome difficulties that are caused by the impairments or disability that they have.
So living independently, I love the idea of that because we're talking about people with disabilities.
Right.
And I think a lot of us sort of think of like, oh, someone in a wheelchair or maybe somebody that is blind. But there really are all kinds of disabilities.
Oh yeah, long list.
And every one is probably unique to the individual.
Well, that is true because two people can have the same disability by title, but that disability might affect them in different ways.
So one other thing I just want to mention, I really should actually introduce Steve Woodward, who is Steve Woodard, who is in charge of data management and quality control. But one of the things that I find so fascinating about LIFTT is it's not only helping people with disabilities, but a lot of the staff are people that have their own disabilities. And I think that's in the mandate for the organization itself.
It is. In fact, both the board and the staff, as a percentage of the total number of people, is relatively high by definition with significant disabilities.
So today what we're going to be talking about is home modifications. And one of the things about living independently is you have to be able to get in your house. You have to be able to move from room to room. Okay. So a lot of people that either have a disability or maybe just recently had a disability, whether it's a motorcycle accident, MS, whatever, need modifications to their home so that they can live independently. So before we go into that detail, Steve, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get involved with LIFTT?
Well, I moved out here from Iowa about 20 years ago. I worked at a big insurance company in the pension department, and I got to a point where I thought, well, actually it came out this way about 3, 4, or 5 years in a row. I loved the mountains and said someday I'm going to move out there. And then a severance opportunity came up, and so I headed out.
And our guest today is Paul Singer. And Paul is here because he's representing his wife, Jo. And there was a very specific project that Steve helped you with through LIFTT that helped make your home more accessible for your wife. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. My wife has Parkinson's. She was diagnosed about 15 years ago. It's something Steve said earlier. It's neuromuscular and it's progressive. So her disability isn't constant, but it's a downhill path. But different people with Parkinson's have different needs at different times. Someone that has Parkinson's the same number of years as her may not need a ramp on the front of their house. Well, the way our house is pretty much she can get along on one level, but then to go anywhere, it's like it was 3 steps down, and then the driveway went over a kind of a slope. And so my wife, who was an RN for 40-some years, she was always worried that, because I'm old, you've seen me walk, but she was always worried when I was helping her down those stairs that she would fall and then we'd both become injured. And as the disease went along, it was increasingly harder for her to get outside. And so as we all know from the pandemic how it is to be locked inside. Within our house, she does well, but the steps, we had to really plan to use the car at any time. So then I hooked up with Steve via, I don't know if you want me to talk about that now or later, but so anyway, that was the need, is some way to get down those stairs, and it's fair distance over the driveway to get to the car, just to be able to go to medical appointments and those kinds of things.
So, Paul, I'll tell you, you're not the only one that has difficulty with stairs. 2 years ago, I broke my knee going down the stairs to my basement. And it was as simple as, it was only like 8 stairs or something, but it wasn't carpeted. I was barefoot. It was in the summer. I slid down, and I didn't have a handrail even. It was just going to the basement to do laundry. Had I had a handrail there even, I probably would have prevented myself from falling. So falling is an issue for not only people with some disabilities or Parkinson's or age. It can happen really to anybody. So it's interesting that you mentioned her being concerned about not only her, but about you.
Right.
So, Steve, tell us a little bit about that process then, about putting in, was it a ramp?
Yes.
Yes. Our house had like a little alcove on the front, and so there was like a step down to the step, and then the steps. And so with the contractor, he helped me arrange, we built like a little, almost like a little deck to get over it, because we have to then turn and go down the, down the ramp. So we built like a little deck off of it, so that we could turn the chair and then go down the ramp, because then the ramp has to be a certain angle.
Because it can't be too steep.
Correct.
Right.
In fact, it has to follow Americans with Disabilities Act regulations governing the construction of a ramp. The simple rule is for every inch of rise from the threshold to the entry to the ground where the ramp will end, you need to have a full foot of run on the ramp. And then the regulations go even a little bit farther and say the ramp can only be so long before you have to insert what's called a rest platform along the way.
So if you had a very steep stairway, you might have to have 2 ramps, actually. Is that right? It would go down part way and then...
Well, we haven't had to build one like that before, but what's kind of similar to your question is that we have, because of a high threshold from the door to a deck, for example, we built the ramp off the deck and then put we think of it as like a wedge, a mini ramp that person can come up the ramp to the deck and then go up that mini ramp to get in through the door.
Right. So, and you think about it, it's not just going to the house, it's also leaving. Right. And I imagine how steep that is important, because you don't want to really lose control of a wheelchair going down. So can your wife get up by herself using the ramp, or does she need assistance?
And it's kind of quirky thing with Parkinson's. people have, it's like a visual trigger that can mess them up. My wife can go up the ramp easier than she can go down the ramp. Now that's backwards what you would think. So even when she's using her walker with the wheels on it, I stand in front of her because going the downhill messes with her Parkinson's worse. And she'll get a leg freeze, which then is how people with Parkinson's can fall. But to go up the ramp, it's, and she's got a rail on both sides. So it's illegal, what Steve said, for disabilities. So it's got so even if she were to lose control of the walker and stuff, she's got a waist high, for her, a waist high handle on each side that she could grab that's kind of flat on the top, so.
Well, and then just the name wheelchair ramp, to some people they might think, well, I'm not in a wheelchair, I'm using a walker, so maybe I can't have one. But anybody who has difficulty with steps, they're using a walker, but they have difficulty with steps, we can get a wheelchair ramp built for them, a ramp built for them.
An interesting personal story. I have a friend whose older brother is a Vietnam vet, and he's in a retirement home here, a nursing home, full of energy, loves people, loves being out, but he has a walker, but it has to be flat surface. And so for him, an issue is he can get around, and he loves walking, but he needs to make sure that that's a flat surface.
Well, and depending on the circumstances like this, if the entry level is high enough off the ground, we can put in what's referred to as a lift. It's kind of like an outdoor elevator. So someone in that kind of a situation may be eligible to get one of them.
So there's a full range of what kind of assistive devices are available.
Well, and since you mentioned a veteran, if I may kind of digress onto something else, I've done some projects with some veterans the last couple of years, and the VA has a grant called a Home Improvement and Structural Alterations Grant that veterans can be eligible for. It just depends on their service or service or non-service connection as to how much they'd be eligible for. But we work these projects not just for ramps, but for bathroom modifications. And there are other kinds of projects that are eligible for this kind of assistance. But the cost of these projects that I got involved with went above and beyond the amount of the grant that they were eligible for. So I helped them apply for additional grant funding to cover the full cost of the project.
So as long as we're talking about that, I want people to know, now this program really is shows in Billings. This is our area. But I know everybody in Billings has a relative somewhere, or a friend, or a neighbor. LIFTT covers, on this map of Montana, all of this blue area. Steve, do you want to tell us about just the sheer size and what service area you have?
Yeah, when you indicated that we were going to go there, I did a tally, county by county, of square miles. And we've got 43,400 square miles of service area there. And some of these counties are actually deemed to be frontier counties because the population is so sparse. I believe the definition is that a county with fewer than 6 persons per square mile is deemed a frontier county. So we aren't actually providing services in some of those counties because we just haven't found a person who needs help there yet. So we have the majority of our staff work out of Billings, but we recently hired a new staff in Glendive who brought on another person. We've got 2 independent living specialists, like I used to be, working out of an office in Glendive. And with all of the business that's been generated there since then, we're probably going to be adding additional staff. So They are literally covering about the eastern half of our service area, and then the Billings staff handles the rest.
So if someone knows somebody with a disability or that would need home modification, they don't have to be in Billings. So you could, that person could actually call the office, and any of those counties, any of those 18 counties are eligible for assistance.
That's correct.
So,
Yeah, and it just whatever county they're calling from will help us determine who ends up working with them.
so another question I have about adaptability. Do you also go into the workplace and help people? Can there be modifications to work sites?
We are working hard on that. We've tried to reach out to the business community in Billings, and we just haven't gotten anywhere with that yet. But that has been added to our outreach program. So we're going to get involved there. But there are all kinds of things that an employer hires a person with a disability, depending on the disability and their needs. There are all kinds of things that we can do to help them. The typical modifications seem to be about a workstation. So computer-related, keyboard-related area, if they happen to be in a wheelchair, they have to have enough area to be able to maneuver around. So there are lots of ways we can help. If an employer's in a situation where they want to hire some people who need a ramp, we can work with them on that.
Paul, I think it's interesting that your wife was a nurse for many years. Is that correct?
Correct. 40-some years at
Yeah.
Deaconess and the subsequent Billings Clinic part of it. She was a hospital nurse.
Yeah. Did you need to make modifications in your home in addition to the ramp to get in and out of your home?
Well, essentially our house is all on one level, except for laundry, which is in the basement, which I now do. But in the bathroom, we're going to have to, I still haven't completed it, and the contractor that did the front part, we have to widen the door. And it's a huge obstacle in a house to be able to widen that door. It's narrower than all the other doors in the house. So we're going to find a way to get that door to, it's kind of clever how people that are in this business can figure these out. He said, well, you don't need to take the whole door out. We just need the bottom part the wheelchair goes through to swing a little wider. So we're adapting that, and then the shower has to be adapted. I'd already, in my plumbing, broken things to make it adaptable now. So I took care of some of that myself. But installing a new shower stall that you don't have to lift your leg up over a,
Right.
you know, to have just a walk-in, and then fixing that door.
Again,
So we got to do that yet.
Right. That is the kind of place people fall. It's wet and having to climb. When I had a broken knee, taking a shower took forever, getting in and out.
Yeah.
So,
Well, lighting is critical too. A lot of people don't realize that, and like with Parkinson's and the visual thing that comes up, you need to have lights on. And so a lot of people that in their house have lights so they can see their TV, but they're not concerned about lighting where that rug goes into the hallway. And so people like Steve here point these things out to you that, and he looks at the lighting. Well, I would never have thought to do that. And then as I've got older in this process, I appreciate that light too, because I trip just as well as anybody does.
I'll tell you an interesting story. I was visiting with some friends down in Palm Springs, and they had this beautiful home, but I thought it was so strange the doors were so wide. Every door was really wide, and everything was on one floor, and even from the kitchen to the living room, it was sort of a ramp down. And I thought, this is interesting. And then I noticed that all the light switches were really low in the house. I thought, why would they have that? Well, the truth is, this was at one time Walt Disney's home. And he was in a wheelchair. And he wanted to be able to turn lights on and off and not have to reach up to a light, and then all the doors were widened. When I heard it was Walt Disney's home, I thought it was for Mickey Mouse to be able to come in and out.
Yeah, good old
Well,
Mickey.
The other thing you don't think about is you need a toilet that's higher for somebody that can't use their legs. Even if my wife is ambulatory, but you can't have a toilet that's only that high off the ground. And when
It's
you
so
travel,
dangerous.
you run into that.
Right. So, Steve, do you do those kind of modifications too in the home?
Oh yeah, in fact, when we're to the point where we're taking a look at what the consumer has asked us to provide in terms of bathroom modifications, we don't just look at the shower, we look at the toilet too. And more often than not, we include in the bid an ADA accessible toilet. The rule says that to be ADA accessible, the lid has to be between 17 and 19 inches off the floor. And then some people will need, I can't think of what you call them, but
Those
the handles.
handlebars,
Yeah,
right.
to help them get up off and sit down. And since we're talking about bathroom modifications and Paul was mentioning the shower, another thing that we've done a lot of in terms of modifications inside the home is adding grab bars. Now, when I first started doing this, sometimes that meant putting grab bars inside a shower. But now, if we replace the shower, you get shower kits where the grab bars are built in.
Isn't it interesting when you think about, when you hear about people that have fallen, it's 90% of the time they've fallen in the bathroom. Whether it's a rug or a slick floor. And those are people that may have had no disability, but it's just an area that you have to be very aware of, particularly with disabilities. Now, Steve, I want to know, we've been talking about sort of wheelchair and ambulatory disabilities. What about blindness or deafness? Are there modifications to the home that can be made?
In a way, I wouldn't refer to these as modifications, but there are pieces of assistive equipment that could be added, like say for someone who is hearing impaired or deaf. These things can include, like say for the doorbell or for the telephone ringing, flashing light. To get out of bed in the morning, set an alarm. There are devices that will vibrate the mattress to wake them up. So there's a wide range of options for the kind of, we'll just call them tools. And if I may, I'd like to bring in our sometimes collaborative partner in figuring out what people need or what will work best for them. We work with Montech, and they have an office in it's on the Billings Clinic campus. It's in the building called Inclusive Education, the Center for Inclusive Education, and they've got so many things for people that have this disability or that disability. And the great part about that is that the way you can work with them is that a person can try something out. They can borrow it for maybe 30 days. And then if they decide that, yes, this is what's for me, but they can't afford it, then we can help them in a couple of different ways. There's a loan program that's available to them. And we can help with the application process for that. Or we could go back through our, I'll just call them traditional grant opportunities to purchase whatever it might be.
I was helping a friend of mine, an older friend, who has a beautiful home, and she wanted to sort of do some rearrangements to make it easier to get around the house. The first thing I noticed is she had lamps and cords everywhere because the lighting was so bad in the house. Overhead lights, but these dim little overhead lights, and she was having trouble seeing. Nothing's more dangerous than having a million lamps around in cords, and one of the things that needs to happen for her is just a much better lighting system to prevent tripping, just to be able to see better. So. Now, tell me, if someone's interested in getting a home modification out of any of these 18 counties, where do you start?
Well, what we ask is that the person call our front desk at 406-259-5181, and they'll get the receptionist. The receptionist will take down their contact information, see if the caller is willing to share what their disability is, and they'll ask, what kind of help are you looking for? She'll take all that information down, and then we put it through a short protocol to assign it to an independent living specialist to work with them. And then that independent living specialist is to return the call within 2 working days, get back to that caller and establish a connection there and identify the needs and take them through an intake process so that we can open up a case to work with them. And then we'll talk at length with them about their needs and help them establish goals. And so then we'll just, however the consumer needs to be helped, we just take it from there.
And in a lot of cases, I'm sure there's need for financial assistance.
Oh yeah.
And that is also available?
Oh yeah. Now, by being available, we mean we help with grant applications. We don't have money ourselves.
Right. But you help them apply for that.
Yes.
And then once that relationship's been established, obviously there's a site visit. So someone would go out and look at the home and figure out what modifications could be made.
Well, in my experience, and this was true with Paul too, I went to their home and we talked at length about what they were looking for, and then part of my visit included taking measurements for the ramp so that we could figure out, I'll call it kind of the lay of the land, because sometimes what we run into is well, maybe vegetation, trees are planted in just the wrong place, and so we have to figure out a way to get around that. We've run into that a lot. Landscaping was the term I was looking for.
It's just like the range of disabilities, the range of homes you deal with, everyone is going to be different.
That's exactly right.
So today we've been talking about home modifications, and there are all kinds of support available through LIFTT, Living Independently, for today and tomorrow. And I encourage you to give a phone call and live a better life. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Paul.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
And actually, this is addressed to Paul, is that once we've worked with someone and we meet the needs, achieve the goals, and we close the case, that doesn't mean we're done with them. So you could come back and ask for help with that laundry, moving that laundry.
You're going to come do the laundry?
Wait a minute. I'm calling about the laundry. Thank you, gentlemen.
Oh, you bet.